simply did so. We did so simply from our vantage point and perspective. We did not have lawyers or lobbyists or others with a bunch of experience drafting these proposals. So had we to do it over again, I think we would have started with a broader inclusion of all pollinators. And I just wanted, again, to remind everybody why we came to the table originally with specifically honeybees in mind. That happens to be the business that we're in, but I imagine it can be more inclusive, and we've tried to represent that in our revisions. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm going to put you on mute for a second. We will ask the general public if they have any questions on this proposal, or sorry, anybody that from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Kara, it looks like you have a question real quick. You're on mute. Still on mute. It looks like you'll type it in the chat.
I can chime in for her.
There you
This
go.
is Kristen.
Okay.
I think we only have 11 committee members, so we're not at quorum. We just want to let people know that not everybody is here.
Okay. We will. That will.
How many do we need?
So I think we have 21 committee members and we need a majority, so that's 12.
So Jonathan is trying to get in and having a problem with the link. He's asked for help.
I got it. I'm in.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't, for some reason, like clicking on the button didn't work if I typed in the meeting.
Okay,
I don't know.
then I think we should be all good.
Okay, thank you.
And it looks like Antonio is also, maybe he's having the same issue.
Yeah, like I had to, did everybody have
okay.
to type in the meeting ID as opposed to clicking on the thing? I don't know. So that was where it was going odd for me. It was like showing me the carrier logo, like the HVAC company. I don't know. It was weird.
I had that problem, but then down below, I found there was like a link that said log in as participant. I think if you try to log in as the host, that's when you get the carrier logo.
I think, right. I think it was like I was trying to log in as the host or something. I just copied the meeting ID from the invite, just logged into Zoom. And
If you click on it directly from the calendar, it will not work. That gives you
right,
that
that's what I
error.
was doing.
And it did me as well. So I have to just click on the link from the email rather than from the calendar.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. It sounds like we do have quorum now. We will continue. So let's start with anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal. Please raise your hand. And we do have David. So David, you'll be allowed to talk. Please, again, introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Noah Wilson Rich. I don't know why it says David Matthias, maybe because he sent me a link. That's probably why. So my name is Noah, and I am an urban ecologist. I'm a scientist. I also run a beekeeping service that creates jobs for beekeepers and student interns throughout the Front Range and the Denver area and other cities. So I just want to express my support for any action that the Denver Green Council does in favor of pollinators. Certainly our native pollinator species are super important, really understudied. And part of the research that we do from our data yielding beehives is that we're trying to understand all of the pollinator plants that are local and native to the area and all of the different bee species that are foraging upon them. So any ways that you guys can promote having more pollinators is great, especially when they're connected to research. I think especially when it's connected to job creation and student learning opportunities. We've actually started a research study in collaboration with about 5 different universities, many of which are in the Denver area. We found 17 research papers on the topic of competition amongst pollinator species. We haven't found anything coming out of Colorado yet that looks at a negative impact of honeybees. So it's a really hot topic of research. And any way that you guys can, through your actions, promote the activities for pollinators to link up with real estate companies or corporations that could fund this work as part of their own goals and ways to build community around pollinators. I think that's a really great service. And it's an opportunity for Denver to really show that you're at the forefront of the green movement. While I don't necessarily support the way that everything is written here, I would support revisions. So any conflict of interest, while I do certainly run a beekeeping service, the way that it's currently written is not one that would favor us. And yet I do favor a revised version of this because I do think that any ways that you can promote bee health and pollinator health, certainly to advance research, is a really good thing. So thank you again for your time and for your work.
Thank you. Anybody else from the general public that would like to speak in support of this? Please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this? Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will go to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask questions. Anybody from the committee have questions on this? Jonathan, go ahead.
I guess I have a process question. I'm not entirely clear why we're hearing arguments again. I mean, like there was just nobody speaking in opposition, but in our last meeting, there was obviously a lot of opposition. And I thought that we were just picking up where we left off last time.
I can answer that. I think
Okay.
that there was some confusion restarting today. So we did tell everybody at the end of the last hearing that there would be no opportunity for public comment today. So the fact that we don't have members of the public speaking either for or against in the numbers that we might expect shouldn't be a surprise, because we told everybody that they wouldn't have the chance to speak today. And I might layer that we also ended last time with a motion on the floor that we didn't vote on because we didn't have quorum. We can begin again, but Jonathan had made a motion at the end of the meeting and then we lost quorum, so we didn't vote. So I'm okay to do whatever, but it's a little bit weird because we did tell everybody that from the public, no one would get to speak. So I'm sure some people probably didn't show up because they knew that they wouldn't be speaking.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry, I apologize. You are correct. That is where we left off. So we will continue forward. Let's move to the next portion of our order, which then would be discussion from the committee. So committee, if anybody has any discussion or wants to make a motion, please raise your hand. Jonathan, go ahead.
I mean, I guess I'll just sort of make the same motion that I made last time. And I think I feel even more sure of that after the meeting that we had with the scientists from CU earlier in the week, which is a motion to reject this proposal. I think that we heard that this is just not really ready and could potentially be counterproductive. I think that all of us believe that supporting the pollinator population is really good, but this over-reliance on honeybees, as we heard from the scientists, could actually have some unintended negative consequences.
Okay, Josh, you're up next.
Yeah, agree with what Jonathan said, but also maybe a question for Christy. Do we have anything in support of broader pollinators or biodiversity in any of the other proposals that we're looking at?
To a limited degree. So we all as a committee approved a landscape proposal that did include provision of pollinator plants on the site. And that's the beginning of it. There is an intention to build upon that in future iterations of the Denver Green Code. We did not have the resources available to do a robust biodiversity support proposal this round, but that doesn't mean that it's not coming. There's like half of the Denver Green Code that we haven't touched, and that falls in there. That whole ecosystem support and symbiotic relationship with the surrounding ecoregions and understanding our evolving urban ecosystem is a future topic, and that's part of it. So that's
Okay.
a long way of saying we had a little bit and there should be more later, but we don't have anything developed to talk about today.
Okay, because I was going to potentially modify what Jonathan said to suggest that we both reject but request a proposal that's more kind of broadly speaks to pollinators. But if that's already in the works, then there's no need to sort of add that second piece.
I think that I'm going to play Eric Browning's voice today and say, from a process standpoint, we're past the point of being able to introduce new proposal ideas, which that would be development of a new proposal. And we just don't have the research to do that in an informed way as part of this process right now. I mean, you may be sitting there thinking that you know exactly what you would outline for each site type and building type, but we don't. And so it's something that we want to do, but we didn't do for this time, except that we did have some provisions in our landscape, and Kristen wants to speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's something in the Western Resources public proposal that deals with pollinator support as well as the one that we already passed. And I don't know when we're gonna hear that one, obviously in the next few code hearings, but that will come up. And there was some specific things, and I can try and pull it up now so we can take a look at it, or at least let you know what the language is.
I'd just like to sort of add before I finish commenting, Christy, I do not have a sense of what it would look like on a site-by-site basis. However, I have toured sites that have enjoyed designations such as Audubon's pollinator, whatever they call it, certification, and that if there were, third-party programs that we could, defer to as a proxy, then we could do that without necessarily needing to sort of do research from scratch. So that if there was a suggestion, it would just be that. But I'm also fine just then echoing Jonathan's and rejecting this for the time being. But with the understanding that, thank you, Adam. With the understanding that supporting pollinators is definitely something that should be in here.
Agreed.
Okay, so
just a quick,
we have a motion.
Yeah, just a quick point.
motion
Jeff and
to-
I were reviewing proposal 32 in greater detail today, and had a note in there about native low water and pollinator species. That was a general landscape one that we discussed previously. So when we come back with our revisions on that, there'll be a little bit more information on pollinators, not to the degree that Christy highlighted, but there is just a little bit more on that one as well.
Okay, thank you. Josh, there is a motion from Jonathan to reject. Was your statement there to second that motion?
Yes.
Okay. All right, there's a motion to reject in a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call a vote, but before I do, we'll go to our note taker, Kara and Kristen, depending on which proposal we're talking about. I think Kara's on this one as our note taker. So can you give us a number of voting members so we know how many votes that we can expect? And also, while you're at it, if you want to do roll call to see if anybody is on via the public side, but needs to be moved over.
Can you hear me yet?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, cool. My test was not working. Looks like we have 13 voting members. And let's see, Eric is out. Daniel Kraus, not in attendance. Paul Hutton, Eric Entlick, Renee Azrabegi, think that's everybody.
Okay, well, I don't see any hands that went up, so that's good. All right, so well, I believe that 7 votes would be majority for anything that we move a motion on, unless that changes with somebody joining or leaving. All right, so I'll call a vote for this proposal P1 for rejection. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 12. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. See none, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. See none. Okay, so this proposal P1 is rejected, 12 to 0. So we will move to the next item of business, which is item 140. And Kristen, I believe this one's yours. So why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction to it.
It's actually Kira's, sorry. Changing it up on you. Kira will take 140.
So 140 is for passive solar on individual lots. It is a residential elective and for new construction. And the purpose basically is to increase passive energy savings through solar orientation that is site specific. And the requirements include an unobstructed view to the sun within 30 degrees of a true south. And specific requirements are an increase of south-facing glazing to between 12 and 20% of the house's conditioned floor area. Windows on south-facing facade shall utilize operable window coverings, such as insulated cellular shades, exterior shutters or shades, awnings, or exterior solar window screens. Thermal mass, so each square foot of south-facing direct gain glass must have 6 square feet of exposed mass surface added within the direct gain space by using a 4-inch thickness of brick, concrete masonry walls, concrete floors, or phase change material. And rooms with a south-facing window must utilize operable vertical fenestration with either operable skylights or roof vents for natural ventilation that accounts for 15% of the total square footage of south-facing glazing, or a thermostat-controlled fan set at 76 degrees.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. In summary of that, I will go to the general public. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Committee, this is your time for questions. Anybody has questions on this proposal, go ahead and raise your hand. Go ahead.
I'll start. The question I have has to do with this being a residential elective code item. So I'm not nearly as familiar with residential permitting as commercial permitting. So I'm curious, with the Denver Green Code, do we anticipate many people who are seeking residential permits to pursue the Denver Green Code?
So we don't, and this is something that maybe we talked about in one of the meetings that you might have missed. At the end of the hearing process, we are going to have to go through and update our designations in terms of what's identified as elective or mandatory, because we have Denver Green Code, limited mandatory use for commercial projects, Denver Green Code commercial pilot project program, which is more extensive use of the code. Right now, we do not have any limited mandatory use or pilot program for residential. We do expect that to come in the future. And so we are continuing to develop proposals related to that, but we just don't have that program. We don't have the ability to stand up that program in 2022. So those designations are going to have to be fixed to correspond with what I just said.
So on this particular amendment, is it more kind of theoretical discussion on it? But even if we approved it, nothing would happen right now since there isn't a residential green code?
Nothing, so it would go in there because it's guidance for, in my happy ideal world, residential teams would read the Denver Green Code and see that this is a priority that the city would like to forward, and that in the future, we'd like to start making these things mandatory. In my reality world, people probably won't. But at what point we are able to add residential use is a question mark. There's been discussion about whether or not the Denver Green Code remains a building code and only gets updated every 3 years, or changes regulatory structure so that it has a different type of cycling for updates, and it supports a broader reach on what the proposals are addressing. So that's an ongoing dialogue. So when residential will be added in is kind of an unknown. In the immediate, there would be no requirement for residential to use it, but in the future, it would be relevant.
Thank you.
Next up is Jonathan. Jonathan, you are on mute still.
Sorry. I guess my question is, so this is a city proposal, is that right? And so then I guess my follow-up is why we're proposing something like this, which is a kind of old style, kind of brute force passive solar approach, as opposed to a straight up science-based passive house approach, which has metrics and establishes a building that achieves a particular performance. This seems kind of like an old way of doing things, and I'm inclined to not support something like this.
And we don't need to, I think, the code does a couple of different things. There's performance path and there's prescriptive path, and lots of, in IECC certainly, and in some of the provisions in here as well. We do have, as one of the 4 Denver Green Code full compliance pathways, passive house plus compliance with all non-energy chapters. It's just, it doesn't apply to residential right now. And so there's that. And then part B of that is, we wanted to make the Denver Green Code less of an all or nothing, and more of a, if we say we were to go to limited mandatory use for residential as well, and you choose a couple of things from each chapter, this would allow a team to do something without doing nothing, because they wouldn't choose passive house as part of the limited mandatory use. They would choose a first step that would start making teams make informed decisions. And it may seem blunt or obvious, but drive around Denver and point to me how many projects are actually doing this. So it's kind of like the baby steps of, let's get started with some of the basics.
Okay, next hand up. Next question comes from Adam.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Jonathan a bit. I don't know how many true south-facing orientations will have an unobstructed view of the sun in the city of Denver. Maybe I'm not reading that correctly, but that seems like something that would be either on a large lot or out on the outskirts of the city. So there just seems like a lot of things here that might be tough to achieve in an urban environment. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Okay, reminder, we're still in the question period. Josh, your question's next.
Yes, I'm just wondering why this feels like an energy related proposal, and our group is non-energy related aspects. Is there a reason that that we're discussing it as opposed to a different group?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the content is going to overlap between chapters. It didn't fall in chapter 4 or 7, which are the 2 direct energy related chapters. It affects energy, but it's also holistic design, you know, how we classify it. It just fell in a different chapter. So it came into this group's purview. I think there are always going to be some overlaps between the two.
Okay, that's fine. So it's appropriate, but, and then the next question I had was, and I'd have to reread the measures, but does it feel like it's more aimed at passive heating or passive cooling or both? It struck me as more sort of passive heating oriented, which is fine. I feel like with an increased climate, the sort of over dependence on lots of air conditioning is going to be maybe the more important factor. So is there a balance of measures here, or do you feel like this could be subtitled passive heating?
I don't know that I personally have a strong opinion on that. I hear your point, but it wasn't something that we really talked about as we were developing it, and I don't know that I have a strong opinion.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing no other questions, we will now go to discussion period from the committee. There were no public comments, so we can skip over that. Any rebuttals? Courtney, your hand's up first.
Thanks. You know, I do acknowledge that passive house is a more, you know, robust path moving forward. It would be ideal if everybody did passive house, but I think this is a happy medium for those projects that might use it in the future to just do overall good, smart design. So I do support this proposal, but I don't see how this would harm a project moving forward if they chose to do this rather than doing, I guess, all or nothing for a passive house. Thanks.
Next up is Jonathan.
Yeah, so, honestly, I feel like this is kind of moving in the wrong direction. We should be adopting proven, tested designs. And I think that if you look at the history of passive solar in the US, it resulted in a lot of overheated buildings that did not perform well. And if we're not tying as much of this code to metrics, then I think that we're kind of losing the plot and we're running out of time on climate change, and we can't be looking at happy mediums. So I think that if we're proposing passive house where we know it's going to work, then I'm 100% in favor of it. And in fact, I think that we should be encouraging people to build to the passive house standard as much as possible. But sort of wishy-washy passive solar is sort of an outdated concept as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think that we should be supporting that.
Next up is Josh.
Yeah, I'm with Jonathan 100% on that last point. I do think, though, that there is a way to strike a compromise. I don't think this is it. Like, I would be supportive of something that sort of spoke to overall envelope performance. For example, if you said like envelope wide U value, including windows and walls, and envelope wide air leakage and envelope wide thermal bridging, for example, right? Or 2 or 3 of those or something like that. Those feel like they're, to Jonathan's point, kind of maybe not, I don't know if that sort of would fit the bill of like a proven design, but I feel like I could sort of point to that and say, yes, that'd be good if that was in every house. So we're not, and again, it speaks to more the question I had earlier about passive heating versus passive cooling would certainly balance that. So I would not be in support of this proposal, but I think if the goal was to create something that was passive house without requiring passive house, that's something that could be achieved. And I would sort of use the sort of direction that I was just suggesting.
Next up is Scott.
Yeah, I think I would agree with everyone, really. I think the hard thing is just a standalone piece that maybe fits into the energy and maybe has some spillover into the non-energy. It seems on its own kind of orphaned and out of context. And because of that, I don't know that it does enough, and that without knowing what else would go with it, could potentially, as the previous speaker said, do some harm rather than good. I think that what's here, the intent is good, but again, without knowing how it fits into the context of anything else, potentially could have some of those adverse effects. That's it.
All right, anybody else? Any other discussion or a motion? This is your opportunity to make a motion at this time too. Courtney, go ahead.
I would just ask a question to Kara and Kristen, who worked on developing this, and would just like some, hearing the responses and the discussions, which I do appreciate, hearing the rationale behind some of these provisions that have been made in here, some of the thresholds. I think it would be good for the committee to hear that background. Thank you.
I'm trying to actually remember where this particular proposal came from in our whole brainstormed list. I do hear what you're saying though, Josh. I don't know that I have enough familiarity with the entire code to speak to how envelope-wide measures for energy savings are addressed in the IRC or in the DGC. Christy, I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit more.
I can't without going and pulling out the energy chapter. It's not on the tip of my brain.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think that I have anything specific to add here too. But I think we have committee members who are active in Passive House, so I think that is important information to consider here.
Okay. So the next hand I see is Josh.
Gonna make a motion. Are we ready for that?
Go ahead.
Can we motion, Christy, that the energy group, in conjunction with other kind of energy related work and in reference to the energy code, add a measure, an additional sort of measure that recognizes passive performance, whether through Passive House or some sort of distilled version of Passive House? In other words, punt it to them. Could we just make a motion to punt it to them?
We can't punt it over to the other committee. And I'm going to say that just because that committee is very overburdened right now and they can't take on another provision. So if we want to develop it within this committee, we can, but that committee doesn't have capacity to take it on.
Did they have to unpack the entire truth of pollination in their session?
The entire truth of electrification.
Okay, well, fair enough. Then I don't know. I mean, I would make a motion to reject it as is, but I would be open to revisiting something with regard to something that was more a prescriptive version of Passive House.
Okay, so there's a motion to reject, but Josh is open to withdraw his motion if someone wants to help revise this.
Thank you, Kevin.
Next,
I wasn't sure how to actually say.
No, that's fine. That's great. Adam, your hand's up next.
I'll second Josh's motion.
Okay. Anybody
Just the first part of it, sorry, Kevin, just the part to reject it, not the extra part.
Okay, understood. Is there anybody else that wants to have any further discussion on this before we call a vote? Second call. Kristen, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if those who are experts in passive design, are interested in putting some language together, as we see that this is an important measure to consider. And it sounds like it's either stopping here and not going forward, right? If we can somehow bootstrap it for another type of language, that would be fantastic. But I know that's extra work. So, and realizing that we're not experts in everything. And so we appreciate the contributions from the committee.
Okay, so there's a question out there. If anybody on the committee wants to speak on Passive House to give us a little bit more info, go ahead. Jonathan, your hand's up.
I guess that kind of falls on me as the passive house designer. So I mean, this is something that the passive house community sort of encounters frequently. Is like, how can we take the pieces of passive house and do parts of it? But it kind of doesn't work like that. It all functions as a whole. And so my proposal would be that the passive house as is, with the certain metrics that are defined in the standard, that's what we encourage people to be doing. I mean, there are lots of cities elsewhere in the world that are just adopting passive house as their standard. So I guess I don't feel like that's too hard for us to meet here, certainly by 2030. So that would be my contribution, essentially. Like, I'm sort of not interested in watering down passive house. I'm interested in seeing it be adopted as widely as possible, because I think it's the most viable path forward. So I triple the motion to reject this.
Okay, understood. And we do have that path, like Christy said earlier, right? As an option for passive house in its totality.
Okay, third and final call for any further discussion before we call a vote. Seeing no more hands, I will call a vote. The motion, oh, Christy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. So I do want to clarify, we have passive house as a path for the commercial pilot program. I'm going to have to check chapter 4 to be able to say whether or not we have passive house for residential. If we don't, then I might propose a modification that instead of just rejecting this, we change this to adding the passive house option for residential if it's lacking. And I apologize, I just simply don't recall. So I would have to look.
Okay,
Jonathan, would
giving
you-
that information.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking, Christy. Given that information, Jonathan, would you want to change your, or I guess Josh, sorry, it was Josh that made the original motion, change your motion to table pending that information?
No, I mean, I think there's another debate to be had here. Like, I don't know that our only choices are to sort of adopt passive house wholesale or not. So to Jonathan's last point, I feel like you could get like 75% of the way to passive house, and I guess you can call it watered down, but I still feel like it's an enormous improvement over in the sort of with the goal of load reduction. And I've like struggled with projects to like apply the specific passive house metrics in a way that was kind of clear. So I don't necessarily think that addresses the issue. And I still think we have some clunky language that does reflect sort of an older perspective of passive design. So no, I guess I wouldn't remove my proposal, but Adam can remove his second amendment if we want to open it up.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Next hand up is Cheryl.
What I think I'm hearing is that this amendment as currently written, there's not a lot of support for. There may be support for adding passive house in a residential green code, but seeing that there is not yet a residential green code in the amendment in front of us, there's not a lot of support for. I guess my recommendation would be to hold the vote on declining this particular amendment, and through another avenue, look at, as the evolution of the residential code, how some version of passive house can be included in that, but that we take it out of this conversation.
Okay, so potentially another person that would like to table it. So Josh, I'll throw it back to you one last time. You could say no, simply say no, if you wanted to keep your motion on the table for rejection.
Well, is tabling it different than rejecting it?
Yeah, rejecting it would be we're not going to hear it again. Tabling it means if we would come back and we could potentially then make modifications to this.
I'm fine with tabling it if it's modified.
Well, before you do that, Josh, it's already in chapter 4 of residential energy efficiency, the passive house option. So I don't see why we would do that again. I just want to throw that in there.
Okay, so Cheryl, I don't know if that answers your concern with what Adam just mentioned. You're on mute if you're trying to talk, Cheryl.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it officially, but I think we can be done talking with this, is what I want to say.
Okay, all right. Okay, good. Well, I'll call a vote then. The vote is to reject all those, and let me lower the hands real quick. Okay, all those in favor of rejection, please raise your hand. Okay, I have 12. All those opposed, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. See none. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. See none. Okay, so this one is rejected. All right, so that brings us to the next item, which is 112A. And Kristen, I believe this one is yours, but maybe you're
this one is mine.
But I do see a hand up real quick before we get into that one. Scott, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I noticed that the agenda, or sorry, the table of contents had a gray water originally. Did that get removed, or did you guys just reshuffle the order? I was just curious.
It did not get removed or reshuffled. So I apologize. We should have started this off with a 2-minute discussion about, reshuffled is the right word, about what we're doing. So based on some concerns that we might not get through all of the proposals in the hearings, and we may get through all of the Denver Green Code proposals, we're not sure. But based on a concern that we might not, we identified some proposals internally with the city team that looked like they would be non-controversial, as opposed to some of the others that might require greater conversation, with an intention of, if we run out of time in hearings and we're not going to get to all of the proposals, discussing those in an internal hearing setting, which would be open to any committee member to join. You just wouldn't be obligated to, because it's another meeting and nobody wants another meeting on their calendar. But if you're interested in the topic, we would want to have you there and we would welcome your feedback. You could also, and members of the public could also email us comments on those proposals that got taken out of the public hearing and put into this internal hearing process. And if those emailed comments raised concerns, we would bring those back to the public hearing immediately. We were just trying to find a way to not lose proposals through this process, because we run out of hearings and they're still left on the table. The gray water proposal was one of those that was identified as being pretty straightforward and one that we didn't think would require a huge amount of conversation. So we shifted it onto that list, and that's why it disappeared from the main hearing list. It may come back if we have enough time in our hearings. We just weren't sure.
Great, thank you for that explanation.
All right, so that moves us on to 112A. Kristen, why don't you take it away?
Okay, so this proposal is for dwelling unit deconstruction. And so we targeted here residential single family homes, trying to have some incentive to deconstruct them versus demoing them with mechanical demolition equipment. And the purpose of this is really to salvage what we can in terms of lumber and materials for the salvage market, and not to have all of that go into the landfill. So there are criteria in here about what to do if it's an unsafe structure or there's asbestos or mold. Any of that is not included. This is really based on the Portland deconstruction proposal, if you're familiar with that. When they started this process, they targeted a third of the existing single-family homes that were typically getting demolished. And so for us, that's about 1930, which is where that year came from. And so this took a little while for the city of Portland to develop, but it has been running now for several years and it has been working out really well. Now that they've kind of figured out a way to do it, they say that it's not really any more expensive than demoing it because they do have the salvage materials that they're using. And that supplements the cost of doing all of the hand demolishing. So I think one of the cautionary tales that we did hear was that regular demolition contractors need to be trained to how to do this. It's not the same thing. So I think that this one might have a little bit more education around it for those that are going to do it. But overall, the support that I found in other areas that are doing this was really, really fantastic. So that's where the background of this came from.
Thanks, Kristen. I'll open it up to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal from the general public, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this? Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask any questions about this proposal. First hand up is Cheryl.
So I have quite a few questions about this one. The first one, it's very, very specific, and I appreciate you giving us the context of why 1930 was chosen, but detached single-family dwelling units built in 1930 or earlier, to me, that means a really old mother-in-law house. So my first question is, how frequent is it in Denver that somebody wants to demolish just the mother-in-law house that happens to be built before 1930 and not everything on the property?
Kristen, I don't know if you're able to answer that, or Kyra or Christy, but feel free if any one of you can answer that.
I was going to float something in. Some of our neighborhoods do have homes that are like single family residential homes that are freestanding, not a mother-in-law house, just a property that is older than 1930. So that is something that you do see in Denver.
Does that fall under the definition? I don't know one way or another, detached single family home. To me, I was thinking ADU, but could that be the primary residence if it's not attached to anything else? Okay. Thank you for that clarification. The second question I had to do with this, I assume, would fall under a deconstruction permit. And is there a Denver Green Code component currently of deconstruction permits or demolition permits?
No, but there would be. So as far as implementation within city processes goes, based on whatever we pass, we know within CPD that there are things that we are talking about in some of these proposals that we are not currently set up to enforce fully and to support fully, and that we are going to need to put those mechanisms in place. So we would ask that you not focus too much on those logistics, because it's on our radar to focus on those logistics as required and relevant.
So in the future, would the intent be that this is well, I guess it says mandatory. So the intent would be that this would be mandatory, not voluntary, moving once we get caught up to that point in time.
Well, I mean, someday, so the provisions that we're talking about here, in the current vision, we would have limited mandatory use of the code where every project team would choose a certain number for residential as well as commercial. And we would see how many teams choose this. If teams don't choose this, we would want to understand why not and how we could evolve it so that it becomes attainable. So it might evolve before it ever becomes something that people start choosing. And then once teams start choosing it, then we'll know that the community is comfortable with it and we can move it into mandatory.
Thank you.
Cheryl, any other questions? I know you said you had a few. I will make sure you're good.
Good for now, thanks.
Okay, next question comes from Scott.
Thank you. Do you have any data on what percentage of the units or residences this would affect? In other words, how many buildings built before 1930 are still standing as a percentage of the residential stock in Denver?
We were aiming for a third based on what we knew about the, how buildings had built out in Denver. I'm not sure how many of those are left, and I don't know if we have access to that data.
Okay, so safe to say less than 33%, essentially, of demos, of potential demolition, and that's only going to go down with time.
Right, like the city of Portland, they covered the first third, and then they bumped it up to their own like 50-60%, right? So they wanted to kind of incubate a smaller group, and then they wanted to widen the net, so they increased it a little bit more.
Okay, great.
Same soup.
Thank you. And then I think I heard the question, and forgive me if I missed it, but what was particularly significant about 1930? So like a house built in 1931 wouldn't have to abide by this. It was just based on.
Yeah, we just kind of took an intersect of what we had information on about the years that, most single family homes were built, and we tried to identify that 1/3 chunk, and put a number on that in time to capture that.
So going forward to increase it, if it worked out well, would it be a possibility then to raise that date, say to 1940 or 1950, or
correct,
if you wanted to capture it? Okay.
Yes.
Great. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Next question comes from Jonathan.
So I guess sort of tagging onto that, my first question is whether the city has a sense of whether houses built before 1930 consist of a third of the demos in the city. Like, I'm wondering, it seems like there's sort of a year, I don't know what the specific year is, before which houses are probably much less likely to get demolished. It seems like we would see a lot more demos of like 50s or 60s ranch houses than we would of a house built in the 1890s in Curtis Park or something like that. So it seems like we're sort of missing, by choosing this year of 1930, a whole bunch of potential demos, I guess.
And I would say that Kristen and I talked about that at one point, because I had the same reaction. And Kristen, you can probably articulate this better than me, but the general sense that we got to was that as far as having salvageable, reusable materials go, it's a lot harder with the homes that were built in 1950, because you won't have like the windows, some of the typical things that people reuse as part of interior furnishings won't show up on those homes. And so for this first round, we didn't want to be overly sensitive about including those. We wanted to include the homes that might have the highest potential of having those sort of reusable items that might be deemed decorative and more likely to be salvaged, and kick this off.
Oh, okay, so to follow up on that you raised, I think, a very important point. I don't think that we should be encouraging people to be reusing windows from the 1920s.
Not on the exterior, for interior. And
Okay.
So that, yeah, it's because people take some of those exterior elements and they use them, they design them into the interior, or and Kristen, you did more research on this than I did, but it was not reusing single pane, horribly performing windows on new homes. No.
Okay.
I mean, it's really like I think some architects, right, or interior designers like to use those kind of character pieces, right, to bring in that old charm, right, to a new build or something like that. And in Portland, and probably in Denver too, right, they said a lot of the salvage material was wood, because that wood is highly sought after in the in the salvage market. And I know that in Denver you guys have several salvage companies, right, that have a lot of wood and doors and, you know, great mirrors and some other things. So I think while 1930 sounds a bit arbitrary, there was some information that you know, went into that number. And I don't think that we're necessarily stuck on that number. If we want to cast a wider net, I don't know if that's a bad thing. You know, we just don't want to overwhelm the marketplace with all of, you know, this deconstruction practice when it's not something that's readily done right now.
All right, next question comes from Austin.
Yeah, I just worry the exceptions in this make it so that it's going to be incredibly difficult for any 1930 pre-house unless we're putting more language in about asbestos abatement and lead-based paint abatement. Because phase out for both of those materials wasn't until 1970s and for asbestos, and then 1982, I believe, for lead-based paint. So the likelihood to find one or both of those toxins in a pre-1930s house is a very high likelihood unless it has already been abated.
Okay, so I'll form that in the I'll form that as a question. Is there a possibility to take the exception out? It sounds like it may be the question from Austin.
I would actually go the other way and say add further exceptions, like structures must be certified as lead and asbestos free before they can be deconstructed.
Okay, Kristen, any comments on that, if that's a possibility?
I'm open to that, although, you know, I think for this to be relevant and marketable, you know, that's an added layer of cost, right? And so, and maybe the way that, you know, maybe you're right that a lot of these buildings are going to have that, and I would say that they should be able to like salvage the remaining portions. I'm trying to look at and maybe we just materials not eligible for salvage. Maybe we write in a specific thing about salvaging remaining items that are not, you know, necessarily asbestos or lead containing materials. So like, I mean, if you know, maybe that precludes your walls, but you could still remove, say, you know, windows or appliances or, you know, things like that. Lumber from areas that are not touching those types of materials.
I'm not an expert in residential demo, but I know in commercial demo, before you start tearing anything down, you have to go abate it, just per OSHA, let alone code, in order to be safe for the people involved with it. I think what this maybe is trying to say is that you should not put somebody at additional harm to go do this. You still need to do what else is required per OSHA, per code, to make the space safe. But if there's something that to go try to salvage and reuse, you'd have to put somebody at harm, or you would have to, you know, abate an individual piece of wood to go reuse it versus, and you can't really abate wood. I'm just using that as an example. I think maybe the intent is right here, but maybe the verbiage just needs to be modified so that there's no confusion on it.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, Cheryl. There's very strict regulations around lead and asbestos for either deconstruction or construction. But the other thing is, I've lived in Portland and in Denver, and I can tell you that in my neighborhood here, they're raising houses all the time. They're scraping houses that are built in the 1930s and 1940s. My house is 1940. And there's a lot of stuff in here. I think this is a great proposal. And I know we're not to this point yet, but I think we could make it better. And I don't know that, I think we're not in discussion, right, Kevin? So that was more of a discussion than a question.
Right. That's all right. We'll come back to that. You'll have time. Next hand is Cheryl. Cheryl, you have a question?
So the language of this says is disassembled by a contractor familiar with deconstruction best practices. How is that judged or certified? How do you know you do have a contractor familiar with deconstruction best practices?
That's an awesome question. I don't know that we have a great, solution for that yet. Portland has a program that they make contractors go through. It's kind of how they keep them honest. And so they make them go through training, and they have to, talk to the city because there's new practices. And they want them to understand what deconstruction means. So I don't know if that's a reality for Denver, but I think that there would need to be some additional education around how this is done for those contractors, demo contractors that would want to participate.
And I might layer on to that, because that was something that Kristen and I talked about also. Because I think the original version did have suggestion of a program in there, and Denver's not ready to stand up a full program like Portland has. However, it would not be out of reach for us to imagine having some additional policy or guide documents that would outline some minimum criteria, which would not be as good as having a full program or a full educational program to go through. But for a first pass for an interested contractor, it might suffice at this stage. If we could get this to have some legs, we might be able to gather up some resources to put together the training program and do something like Portland is doing. We don't have the capacity to do that now, or we would just pair it with this right now and say, we'll do it.
So this language is meant to be a little bit of a placeholder.
Yeah, and allow us some room to get started, knowing that we'll keep going.
Fair enough.
Okay, next question comes from Antonio.
I think Christy just kind of covered it, is if we had something with landmark designation, perhaps, where we have contractors who have gone through that process and entrusted with the city. Doesn't sound like we have them. My issue would be a little bit with the date. In 10 years of looking at just Denver alone, I can tell you that 1930 is not a good date. The second thing is that most of these are built, they're double brick veneer. So yeah, there might be something out there that might have wood construction, but a lot of these houses are going to be double brick veneer. So let's keep that in mind, that they're going to salvage those anyway. That's nothing that any demo contractor is going to be like, let's knock it down with the machine. They're going to salvage that. Just my opinion on that. The issue I have with the exception is structures unsafe. Well, if our goal here is to salvage some of these materials so we can use them and use them in other landmarks. By the way, I do think we really need to tie in the landmark. Somehow we need to tie landmark into this because they're a key component to our city. But where I'm going with this is the structure being unsafe shouldn't just justify, hey, let's just demolish it. Sometimes those are the best ones. Sometimes you have some pieces and facades or windows or things that you really need. And just by putting in there that the structure is unsafe and given the green light to use a mechanical operation to demo it, I think is a poor choice of words.
Okay, so in the form of a question, it sounds like asking if there is a way to possibly modify that exception for unsafe structures.
Yeah, if we can modify it to where, I mean, what deems unsafe? I mean, are we just saying that, is it like going to collapse, or is it unsafe per Denver Building Code 105.1? I mean, what are we talking about here? It's just too vague there, saying structure is unsafe. I think we need more literature in there.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you on that.
All right, next question comes from Scott.
Thanks. Just a question on the process of contractors and getting a demolition permit in Denver. I believe the demolition contractor is required to submit the permit application. And so my question is would there be a way to somehow in that process have the contractor say that they have received special knowledge or special training, or that you deny a application where a contractor doesn't have that sort of thing without having a full-fledged program for them, or come up with a way to identify pre-approved contractors that have gotten this sort of thing. So I guess my question is currently, if that's correct, if the demolition contractor is who applies for the demo permit, and if that is the case, is there a way to implement something extra box to check that shows that they've done something?
Potentially, and I like that idea, and we would have to see what programs are available out there so that we're putting something on there that is attainable. But it would be awesome if there's extra training that already exists out there that we could say, have you done this, and can you show that you've done this? That would be beautiful.
Christy, I have a question on our 1Ds or our demolition contractors. We typically, when we do those reviews, because I do a lot of those reviews, we're not looking for that. Is there any possibility we might be able to add some of this language in their actual application? Then when we get them, we can kind of weave through them at that point and maybe make 2 different categories of them.
So I'm going to give sort of this is not a good answer, but I don't live in that world. So I can't visualize what we're talking about until we look at it. I guess in the simplistic sense, I would say, yeah, what I'd like to do is kind of sit down and talk about how these things work and how they come through so that we can find the right path forward. I'm confident that we can find the way to do it. And I like the idea of tying it into the application materials. That's not a world I deal in. So I'm not going to have a clear idea of what makes sense right now.
And I'm sorry, I had one more question too, not to jump on anyone else, but how do we keep these guys accountable when they come in there and they say, okay, we're going to do it manual? And, how do we know that, are they making the determination on the windows or what's to be saved at their own discretion? Or will this pre-planned, hey, you're going to save the north elevation, second floor, third window, or how do we know what's going to be saved?
So my suggestion would be, in my brain, what I have been figuring is that this goes to policy, where we would say that there's a certain inspection that has to be done, where we walk through the property with the project team, and identify what's going to be targeted for salvage before they start tearing into anything. So it would not just be left to the discretion of the people who happen upon the materials. There would be that sort of pre-inspection. And then as far as substantiation goes, we typically don't like to start policing, in a manner where we ask teams to send us receipts. And, that's not typically the role that we play. But if we've identified all of those things beforehand, there might be some sort of follow-up that comes after that. We would have to talk about how that works with the inspections processes that are already in place, and how we could make that fit in a way that doesn't start adding 1 million extra inspections for the inspections team to start doing just for this. And I think we could do it. We would just have to work that in. So that kind of goes to that other side of the implementation question, which I want to just suggest that we can work through these things, but we're not here to figure out how we're going to work through all of these things today. If we think that this is a good, viable proposal and idea and intent for Denver, we know that we're going to have to work through the logistics of these things. They're new.
And we did include a list of all the salvageable materials here at the bottom. And it also depends on the salvage market, right? If the salvage market is not, looking for some of these things because they can't sell them, right? It might be a little bit of a different story. So I think, we ask that all salvage materials that can't be sold or donated or reused, right, that they're recycled. And then
the list is great. I like it.
And I did have a response about the structure is unsafe. So when Portland did it, they have an exception for an exemption if the house is structurally unsafe or hazardous to human life. So I don't know if that language should be included in here, but it's ready to collapse. I don't know if there's a safe way to deconstruct it.
No, thanks for clarifying it. And if at all, if we could add one more thing on some of those salvage materials, I think some of that landscape stuff is important because those were hand chiseled back in the day. So a lot of that stuff was done by hand. So yes, those things are important, but I think some of the other items, if we can move to add some additional language, including some of that landscape and some of that stonework that was done by hand, it's just a disgrace to throw it out. So beautiful. Some of it was, I mean, it's awesome just to get rid of. So if we could add some of that too, that would be great.
Okay, next question comes from Cheryl.
I don't know if this is too early and I don't know the right words, but from everything that I'm hearing, I think we want to move to table to reword a few things. It sounds like there's strong support for this general idea, but that some things maybe need to be wordsmithed just a little bit.
Okay.
I guess I would ask when we make the motion, rather than tabling, if we think that we can get to a point where we have a motion with the agreement that everybody agrees on the intent and the subgroup can finalize the language, that would be ideal. But if we need to table and come back and vote later, we can definitely do that if we just feel concerned.
I think we can get to that point based on what I've heard everyone say.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next section of our hearing, which is discussion or motions. I think we've got all the questions taken care of. You can still ask questions, but let's go ahead and open it up for further discussion. If anybody wants to weigh in on it or to make a motion, sounds like there is potential modifications that some people want to make. So now's your time to do that. Any discussion or motions? Please raise your
Mr.
hand.
Moderator, I'd make a motion with modifications for sure. Motion to approve.
Okay.
Based on a
Motion to approve
subcommittee,
with,
or if we can do a subcommittee or something like that, but this is a great idea.
I'll second that, but we don't need a
Hold
subcommittee.
on, one
Oh,
second.
sorry.
1 second. just to be clear. So Antonio, your motion was to approve as written. That is a little bit different than I think what you were trying to say, is to that there are some modifications that need to happen. That subcommittee would not make those modifications. They would only make it so the language works. It's not for them to make this proposal work. So if your motion is to approve as written, that's one thing. But if you want to approve with the intent to modify, this group
With the
would have
intent to modify,
it.
I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, and then Adam, now I think you're going to chime in on that.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say, that I think we can modify it right now and not put the burden of a subcommittee on all of us. But I'd like to suggest a modification of changing 1930 to 1940.
Okay, so just for proper purposes, since Antonio made the motion to approve with modifications, we'll start with Antonio with what modifications you want, and then go on down the list with hands. So Adam it sounds like Adam has a motion to, or would like to make a modification as well. So Antonio, let's start with your modifications that you would like to have done.
I like that modification in 1940. I think that gives us a little more room. I think that's a great idea. And then the unsafe, or the structure is unsafe. If we look at our exceptions there, if we could add that language, I don't remember who actually gave us a little bit more, but unsafe to life or occupancy, what we had in there, that language would have been great. I don't remember the gal who voiced in on that.
It was structurally unsafe or hazardous to human life.
Yes, that's beautiful. If we could add that.
As
And
a
then
more,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
as a more direct statement on that, what a structure is unsafe to manually demolish. Because really it comes to the poor guy or gal that has to go and do the work and not putting them at risk.
Yep. And then my last part that I was to modify would be to salvage some of that landscape material of the steps, some of that stuff. I don't know how we want to incorporate that, but possibly a lot of that stuff is, they can use it for many other things, but yeah, landscape material would be fine.
Okay, so make sure I have those correct on the screen. Hopefully I transferred those correctly.
If we can include
So
with
with that
landscape
being-
materials, stone, or handwork stone, something of that nature. A lot of, like I said, a lot of that stuff is all hand worked, and they're just scooping it and throwing it into a dumpster. Hand carved or stone, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And then just again, trying to keep things in order. Since Adam, I think that was your only change, is that 1940, but your hand was up next and it put down. I just want to make sure that was the only other modification you wanted to make.
Well, I actually had a point of discussion, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but do we want to put a square footage, a minimum square footage into this? I'd be curious to see how people feel about that. Like if you have someone who has a 500 or 600 square foot tiny little structure, do we want them to go through deconstruction, and is it even worth it? So I just wanted, and maybe Portland doesn't have any square footage requirements. I don't know if you know, Kristen, but I just wanted to
I
open that
don't
up.
think they do.
Yeah.
I think it was 200 feet. I've been reading through it. And yeah, I thought it was 200 feet or square feet.
Okay, so we'll keep that thought in mind as a committee from Adam there. But the next hand up is Scott.
Thank you. I think what I'm wanting to do is add to the modification, previous modifications. Is that an acceptable gesture at this point?
Absolutely, and then we can ask Antonio, since he made the motion, if he's okay with that additional exception.
Okay.
Or
so
sorry,
the
or
exception,
modification, sorry.
Modification, yeah. As to the exception language, adding something along the lines of, because I think we all agree that asbestos contamination, lead, any hazardous material needs to be inspected and abated prior to any demolition. That's just how it works through the state of Colorado, anything that needs to get demoed. So language in there that says, and honestly, I don't even know if we need it, and in which case we could remove the part about asbestos contamination and lead-based paint, since per Denver's permitting process, it needs to be inspected and tested by the state of Colorado. So I guess I would propose either adding that language in there that everything is to be abated and inspected per the state of Colorado, or maybe removing those since they're a little misleading and already covered by that process. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, so there, I guess just a point of clarification. If we do add that, it would not, I don't think it would be under the exception. However, we would, if we take it out of the exception, then that would be the proper place. So I think
fair enough.
The city mull that over on whether or not that's already a requirement and if that could be taken out or not.
Fair enough.
And then
Yeah,
Antonio think about, if you're willing to accept that change with your motion. On that. Actually, all the hands are down now, so I guess Antonio.
Well, and then I did
you're okay
just
with
have
that.
one follow-up question to the 1940. I guess I'm not opposed to that modification, although to me, I would ask how that's not just an arbitrary date. And do we know, we knew that 1930 affected roughly 33% or less of the building stock. What would raising the date to 1940 add to that? I guess just having some, theory behind it as opposed to just randomly picking a date would be a question to that person.
No, that's a great comment. And the reason I said another 10 years is in looking at these houses, a lot of times as we got farther down the line, it's going to tie into what you were saying. So more of that brick double veneer is what we were seeing earlier on. And that's really what we want to save. And you start getting into that wood construction. As far as the asbestos, I would be okay with that. But I do agree with the way it was written, the way Christy and the other gal had written it. But if we do move it, we need to put something in there to comply with, like he was saying, with the state of Colorado. I think that's a great idea. So either we leave it there or move it into the other section above and put to follow, asbestos and lead-based paint testing and approval from the state of Colorado. Or they can even provide a certificate, right? Maybe up in there, yeah, maybe we can put it in there that they could provide us documentation at permitting.
I'm sorry, but my hand was still up. I was going to take it down, but that did have one additional thing. Was would that be a good point to add that a pre demolition inspection is required so that those things can all be looked at? Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's what we were talking about with Christy before too, is that I think that this is going to need some massaging later on. And in my opinion, I think we would need our landmark agency involved with this to really give it due justice. But absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, so I added the sentence now, correct me if this is not correct or not, but it says, this process must follow the state asbestos and lead-based paint removal guidelines. And I took out in the exception, the asbestos contamination and the lead-based paint. Is that, did we capture that correctly?
Yes, Mr. Moderator.
Okay, cool. And again, we can, with a subcommittee, we can tweak those words or those sentences a little bit, but the intent is there. So that's good. Next hand up is Austin.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that is the right way to do it. I was reading through the Portland document, and it looks like they put it on the contractors to have the right lead and asbestos training and just kind of leave it at that in their code. So that might be another way to do it, but I think how you listed is correct and looks good.
And Mr. Moderator,
Thanks
one
for-
more thing,
thanks for the
can
input.
we add on that last sentence too, and to be licensed? Because a lot of people, they'll just have someone, they'll provide that certificate or whatever have you, but I think they need to be licensed with us. I think that's gonna button it all up there. And be licensed with the city of Denver, license with jurisdiction.
Okay. Scott, go ahead.
Thanks. Just maybe a suggestion I agree with what's been put in, but maybe a more neat or efficient way to state that is, I know these are all requirements that are in the demolition permitting process by the city of Denver. And so it might be redundant to be saying what is already required, which is having a inspected, tested by a licensed contractor, et cetera, et cetera. So one other thing to look at down the road is maybe just saying must abide by the current Denver demolition permitting process.
I like that. Yeah, I think you're right. That makes it a little bit redundant. That I like what you just put there. That speaks for itself. Yep.
Okay. Any other discussion or anybody else that wants to suggest the modification while we have modifications open? Kristen, go ahead.
I think Cheryl had said for the exception on structure is unsafe was for structure is unsafe to demolish, right? You had some other language in there and I want to make sure it got captured.
Yeah, thank you. Unsafe for manual demolition. Makes it a little more specific that somebody doesn't try to get out of it because they say it's unsafe. No, it really has to do, if it's not safe for a person to physically go demolish it, then that person shouldn't be asked to do that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And Tony, you're still good with that?
Yes, Mr. Moderator.
Okay. All right. So there is a motion. Adam, I think I didn't write it down. I think you seconded this one, but I could be wrong. I don't know if we had a second or not.
I did.
Okay, great. And you're okay with these modifications as well with your second?
Yeah, I think they're great. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Moderator, I'm sorry,
Okay.
one more thing. I hate to do this to us, but I know not to go back to the stone, landscape materials such as stone, can we put comma, fencing? Some of that stuff is, you just can't get it no more, it's gone. Just to give us, and fencing, or even another sentence, or to be determined by jurisdiction process, something like that. Because some of that stuff, again, we're making a blanket statement, but some of this stuff is going to be crucial. Like, we're never going to get it again. It's gone. It's gone.
I don't think we want to leave it open-ended to be determined by, some subjective measure. I think we've got to be defined here.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the landscape, I think that incorporates then a little bit the landscape, stone, fencing, and hardware. I think I'd be happy with that if you're okay with that, Christy.
That sounds great to me.
Okay, and Adam, you're good with that?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. All right, so there's a motion to approve with modifications. So what we'll do first is we are going to vote on these modifications, and those modifications are read on your screen. So I'll call a vote, all those in favor of approving those modifications to the proposal, please raise your hand. Well, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Seeing none. Okay, so modifications have been approved. Now, I guess just for formality, Tony, would you be willing to make a motion to approve as amended with the intent for a subcommittee to further modify any clerical things?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, a motion to approve as modified with subcommittee.
Okay. And is there a second? Scott, go ahead.
Yep, I second.
Okay, great. Any further discussion before we call a vote? Seeing none, I will call a vote. You're voting on approving this proposal with as modified with a intent for a subcommittee to further modify to meet any clerical things that need to be adjusted. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Well, okay, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, so this does pass. Now, one last order of business before we take a break. Anybody that wants to be part of that subcommittee, please raise their hand. So, Kara, I believe you're the note taker on this one. Can you put Antonio to be a part of that? But I think you're going to be working with the city. The city is probably going to just handle this, and obviously you'll be a part of that. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. I'll put a timer up. Kristen, you got a question?
Yeah, just real quick. I noticed that there's someone from the public who's voting, and I just wanted to make sure that we make sure that only voting members are putting their hands up.
Thank you for that. All right, I'll set a timer for 10 minutes. We'll see you guys. Feel free to turn off your cameras if you want, but we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Hey, Kevin, are you by your computer?
I am.
Just looking at the chat, will we be able to vote moving forward if one person leaves? Is it a quick count?
No,
I
we,
don't think so.
yeah.
Okay.
You're correct. We won't be able to.
Um,
So if you know, I guess we'll have roughly just under 20 minutes.
yeah, I'm
When we
looking
get
to
back
see if
from
there's,
when Josh has to.
yeah, I'm wondering if there's one
after
that can do in that time. I assume it might not be the next one though.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know if Kristen's still on or not, or by her phone. I don't know if she knows one since she has the rest of them.
Yeah. I'll look through and see if there's one I think maybe we could do.
Okay. Okay, if you can hear my voice, let's start signing back on.
Kevin, I'm wondering if 48B, because there's just one modification to that, it looks like.
Okay.
But we can confirm with Kristen.
Open that up. All right, welcome back, everybody. We have a little bit of a snafu here. We're, as you all know, we're pretty close to quorum to begin with, and we do have someone that has to leave at 4 o'clock. So we're going to try and move some things around, because as soon as we lose any one person, we will not be able to vote on anything moving forward. So we're going to try and jump to 48B to see if maybe we can get through that one before the 4 o'clock kind of cut off when that person has to leave. So Kristen, I believe this one's yours. Do you want to go ahead and give us a summary of this one?
Sure, I'll take it. So this one is fairly straightforward. It's about exterior lighting and the bug requirements. The intent is to add another layer of restrictions for glare. If you go down a little bit, Kevin, there's a table. So the one that's highlighted, greater than 2. So we just added this line in this table to basically make sure that we were consistent with LEED and increase the stringency of the glare requirements on the interior of the property. So the levels for backlight and uplight have not changed. And we're recommending that this, moves to mandatory. So really what,
okay, thanks for
that's
oh, I didn't mean to cut you off, sorry.
Sorry, no. I'm like, let's just add some more. So that's really the only thing that's changed here.
Thanks for the summary. We'll open up to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support of this, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to the committee for questions at this time. Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Cheryl, go ahead.
To make sure I understand this right, this language is currently written, with the exception of the yellow stuff, which is just literally one line, is
Yes.
currently in the Denver Green Code.
Correct.
And so the amendment is one, to add that one line, and then, but also to take it from Denver Green Code to mandatory building code.
I think, can you scroll up? I think this is from elective to mandatory within the green code.
Okay.
There were some things that were recommended to move into building code, and this is the replacement of that in DGC.
So into mandatory green code or into
mandatory green code.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sorry.
So, but I just want to be clear on what that means, because so we've got the limited mandatory use of the Denver Green Code where teams will be asked to choose a couple of provisions from each chapter. There's no single provision that we are imagining saying is part of that, like teams will have that choice. And then there's the Denver Green Code as written path, where there are mandatories and electives. We are going to do a pass at the end to reconfirm. So right now where we're saying mandatory or elective relative to that path is like, these are suggestions where we might land, but we're not certain. At the end, we're going to look through all of it and make that assessment, because the 2019 Denver Green Code achieved approximate level of benefit similar to LEED certified. We're going to raise that bar to equivalency with LEED platinum, and we're going to have to do some calibration to make that happen.
All right, next question comes from Adam.
I'm gonna suggest this when we get into discussion, but is there a reason you didn't put the internally lit signs into this proposal? And a limitation on the lumens on those signs?
I don't think there was a conscious effort to exclude them.
Right.
But I don't know. I personally, when we get to illuminated signs, there's always an issue with them for whatever reason. Either they come in late, they're not with the, with the building permit package. And so there's always like an issue with those. I mean, I'm not opposed to including that. It just didn't make it into this language. And I think it is a little bit cumbersome to try and include.
Okay, I think we can do it pretty easily, but thanks.
I don't know
Okay, any other questions from?
or not.
Say that again, Kristen. Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll go to the discussion portion from the committee. Any discussion or motions at this time? Anybody has any discussions, some comments, feedback, or wants to make a motion? This is your opportunity to do so.
I'm stalling. I need
Cheryl,
a
go
minute.
ahead.
I need a minute to get that language. Sorry.
I guess
Cheryl's hands up, so we'll go to her.
I guess question / comment. I am not all that familiar with the technical aspects of adding that one line, but it sounds like that's in line with how LEED reads. Is there, so I guess I'm leaning towards like, okay, if that's what LEED says, let's just do it. But I don't know if there's anybody more knowledgeable on this topic than I that can think of a reason why adding that line in there is not a good thing to do.
And Cheryl, I'm pretty knowledgeable about LEED. Those are just glare ratings. And they're just suggesting that the lamps have the luminaires have less glare
And I think that's important.
in those zones. Sorry.
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Adam.
No, I was just gonna say in those lighting zones. So lighting zone 0, 1, and 2, and 3, which go from urban to rural, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. And I think, I'm not sure why the middle of the site, right, which is the distance in mounting height nearest to the property line. So once you go over 2, you're really in the center of the site. I'm not sure why those were excluded in the first place, but I know that, in parking lots and things like that, glare for drivers and stuff is important. And I think also consistency with other standards is also important.
Okay, hopefully that answers Cheryl's question. Any other discussion or motions? Adam?
So I'll make a motion to amend this with the language that I put in the chat around internally illuminated exterior signage. If you want to just cut and paste that, it's probably the easiest thing to do.
Okay, and where would you like that put?
It could be put, probably should be put right up front as a C, a letter C right there. I think, unless Kristen has a better idea.
That's fine. And this is not necessarily specifically related to glare, is it? Is it just more?
I mean, yeah, it's glare. I mean, it's all glare, and an internally illuminated sign, the brighter it is, the more it's going to be in your face.
Sorry, I should, there's no like backlight or uplight. There's no bug rating on signs.
Oh, correct. Yeah. For internally illuminated, yeah.
Right.
But you bring up a great point. Do we want to address, I think that maybe you addressed it already, is external lighting for signs. Let me see if that's in there.
I think, well, the bug ratings, there are some limitations on how, like what types of fixtures are included. Because there are like bug ratings for landscape, like bollards. But I'm not sure like landscaping lights, there's a bug rating for.
Well, it wouldn't be a bug rating. It would specifically be, I think it should be not to uplight a sign, right, at all. So all external lit signs, not internally lit signs, but all externally lit signs should be downlit. And then you could put a bug rating on it.
Right.
Because I don't see that in here as is. A lot of
And that is above and beyond what LEED requires, or is in their language, I think.
I think LEED actually does say not to uplight, because if you uplight a sign, you're basically breaking the bug rules, for lack of a better way to say it. Let's see. I mean, we could leave that out. I mean, it's fine. I think it's good the way it is.
Okay. Any other discussions or a motion? Anybody want to second that motion from Adam to add item number C? Or does anybody else have any discussion? You don't have to second that. Jonathan, go ahead.
I just had a question of whether we have any like dark sky requirements within the green code anywhere, as far as like uplighting that Adam mentioned. I don't know.
No, I don't believe that we do. We have our lighting provisions in the green code are pretty limited, and they started from the base 2018 IGCC. I don't believe that there's much related to dark sky in there at all.
So would this proposal be somewhere where that would get included, or would that be an entirely separate proposal?
Good question.
We do have uplight requirements. So I don't know if that's specifically what you're asking in terms of dark sky, if those are different.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, that uplight would be more or less not allowed.
Yeah, there's Jonathan. This is all around the glare ratings are all based on like shielded lights, right? That are down lights. If you put in an uplight, you're not going to meet any of those glare ratings at all. So dark sky is awesome, but it's definitely the next level. It's like the passive house of of
Well,
glare, right?
I mean, isn't that what the green code is for, right? Aren't we supposed to be sort of shooting for, you know, where we want to be designing, not as opposed to sort of just squeaking by? I'm not an expert in dark sky. I've dealt with it on one project, so somebody here maybe knows more about it than me.
There are uplight rating requirements for different lumen classifications of lumens, and a lot of it is U0, which I think is like the lowest level or none, and then it goes up from there depending on your light zone. So it is pretty much minimized for uplight in the current DGC. They also have allowable uplight for facade lighting as well, which is 0 in LZ0 and LZ1. And then it goes up a little bit from that.
Okay, just to, for the
Focus
sake of trying
areas.
to move this forward, because I know we're going to run into quorum issues. Adam, your hand's still up. I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I will ask a second time if there is a second on Adam's motion to modify. If there, Cheryl, go ahead.
I second on Adam's motion to modify.
Okay. Being that there's a second, I will call a vote. You are voting just on the modification that has been added to this proposal. All those in favor of that modification, please raise your hand. Okay, I see 9. Go ahead and lower your hands. 10. The one snuck in there at the last moment. All those opposed, please raise your hand. None. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, so the modification does pass. So now, if someone wanted to make a motion to approve as modified, that would be the next step, or to reject. That is where we're at. Courtney, go ahead.
Motion to approve is modified.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Adam? Okay, any discussion? Seeing no further discussion from the committee, I'll call a vote. You're voting on approving this proposal as modified on the screen. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Ken, go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 2. Okay, go ahead and lower your hands. And then all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I don't think we have any, because that's 12. 0. Okay, so the proposal with the modification does pass. So I think we are going to lose quorum here now that we're done with this one. As soon as that one person signs off, we will then adjourn. But until that person signs off, I guess we'll continue forward. So,
Hi, Josh.
yeah, Josh, thanks for showing up anyway. I mean, it's not just because of you; it's all the other colleagues out there who didn't show up today that we should be upset with, not with Josh. So, all right. With that being said, we are below quorum, so unfortunately, we would have to adjourn for today. Kristen, your hand's up. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just curious if any of the public attendees are stepping in for any of the panelists or any of the committee members? Just as a quick.
Good question. Don't see any hands going up from the general public, so I would assume no. All right, well, thank you all for joining us today. Unfortunately, we have to adjourn due to quorum. Just goes to show you how important it is, attendance is on this. So I appreciate all of you who showed up today. Feel free to give everybody else grief next time you see them so that they show up next time, but hopefully enjoy the rest of your day.
It's pretty nice outside.
As always, yeah, I'll stay on, but as always, feel free to leave as you wish.